Wheel of Genre, the show for readers who had an audio issue on their first time recording this episode. So now they are re-recording everything from scratch. That's right. We're doing round 2 to make this story happen. Right now we are reading every story in Ann and Jeff VanderMeer's The Weird Anthology, including this one, Olympe Bhêly-Quénum's A Child in the Bush of Ghosts. I'm Zach, and this week I am really, really interested in mythology. I guess comparative mythology. There's no other way to talk about it really other than just differing mythological systems. One I'm familiar with, one I'm less so, interacting in my brain.
I'm Bob. I'm interested in death and the weird. I'm really interested in what can you accomplish or what can you get away with if you don't believe in death. This is really fun. It's you go into the woods kind of story. You get lost. Crazy things happen. But I want to look a little bit about Bhêly-Quénum's life first before we get into this story. It's a classic setup, but we can come to it in just a second. I was really interested, Zach. I was reading this before and again. There's introduction by a BSA Michael Porter, and he says that a big part of Olympe Bhêly-Quénum's writing is that he was studying in France, and then he was also using a lot of classical tales from Benin. And so one thing that he says is he and his I guess any characters in his stories would have some things in common, almost nothing, but one of the most important things that they always had in common in each story was that they were looking both at a Western tradition, especially stuff with modern Europe, and then also a traditional African tradition, and always trying to find and blend, he says this, blend the positive aspects of both. So putting the two together to make something new.
That's really, really interesting. And even more so because actually with this one, what I found was that in broad strokes, I could compare it to, Western storytelling. Maybe we could talk about like a coming of age tale, a Bildungsroman, or maybe we could talk about the encounter with death or the passage into adulthood. There's all of these things, but to me, I have a hard time mapping this onto like European storytelling tradition. So it is interesting hearing you say that. And I would love, apparently he's still alive now and living in France. I would love to sit down with him and be like, tell me everything.
Tell me everything. Yeah. I mean, he was, before he was doing some writing, he was all like, he traveled a lot, and he was also working as a diplomat, and he studied at the Higher Studies for Overseas Territories and was working in the French Foreign Office, the Diplomatic Academy. So he's very interesting. He was going all over the place. I think that it feels like a very European start. It feels like a Grimm's fairy tale because a kid with his uncle, they go into the woods, and then the uncle says, "Hey, I need to leave you here for a little bit." And the kid says, okay. Uncle says, "Here's some fruit. You'll be fine." And then the kid has to survive on his own. The uncle just doesn't come back. The kid goes off wandering. To me, it feels like the start of a German fairy tale. Some kind of parental figure says, "I don't want you anymore. Here's the woods, your new home."
I think a German fairy tale is a really good comparison for this. And especially when we think about like the perspective that this story is told from. I mean, we know that it's being told from the perspective of an adult, as in this is a person who is reminiscing about something that happened many, many years ago in their childhood. And we feel like we are looking at this narrative through the eyes of a child, especially in moments like this when we're like, what do we do? I'm just going to read a paragraph that I loved. He left me, plunging with big steps into the bush that stretched out as far as the eye could see. He had put a big orange and 4 guavas into my hands. Suddenly, I felt dead tired. I was gripped by the urge to cry, but controlled myself. So like right there, we are there with the child. But then like the child says this really interesting, very adult thing. He says, "I've never had much use for crybabies. There is nothing I detest so much as giving unbridled expression to our sorrows." So it's a sudden like, oh, but then we're back to the child. He waits, he eats an orange and a guava, and then he waits even longer. And then finally, in a last ditch effort, he eats the final guavas, and then nothing. The uncle never comes back.
Zach, just a minute ago, you mentioned that it feels like a Bildungsroman, and I'm really interested in that idea because I can't tell if it feels like a Bildungsroman or a picaresque, more like Pinocchio. He does seem to learn something. He goes back and forth from being too childish. He tells us he was spoiled. His parents are too nice to him. Everything is handed to him. He keeps telling us that. Later, he makes really adult decisions. Then he acts like a child again and gets really afraid. Later, he does something very adult and seems to have a kind of loss of innocence or a awakening, in one could say. But it feels also maybe like a picaresque. There's the skeleton we eventually meet. There are other strange creatures that we meet, and there are just kind of crazy things that happen that I don't even know. The reader cannot reasonably interpret them, but he seems to be able to handle them very well. And the other adults in the world would not be able to handle them. So it feels like kind of more supernatural than a regular Bildungsroman, and it seems almost couched within like picaresque physics,
I like that. Picaresque physics. Yeah. So, wow, that's like a good research question. Maybe we need to have sometime. What is the world of the picaresque? Because I think you're right that there's a lot of things that don't make sense in a realist fiction mode, but I wouldn't quite just chalk them up to just being weird. You know what I mean? Like, so, for example, there's this moment after he meets the skeleton and he's running through the woods trying to get away from the skeleton. And no matter how fast he runs, she's always 20 paces behind him. But she's not running. She's just normally walking. And then he runs into his uncle and he's like, "Why did you abandon me? Why, what's going on here?" And the uncle was like, "I was right here. I was walking perpendicular to you. I did my whole day's worth of tasks. I came back quite quickly. I don't know why from the uncle's perspective, he wasn't gone that long. You know what I mean? So it's as if the child slipped into picaresque time. There's picaresque physics, there's picaresque time. They go hand in hand together. But the uncle was like, "I saw you running through the woods and I just walked along beside you just to see where you were going, what you were doing." There's also elements of spatial warping. He seems to have gotten across the river without actually crossing the river at a certain point. Later in the story, of course, he goes underground, and when he reemerges, it doesn't seem as though that much time has passed for him. He hasn't gotten hungry. He hasn't needed to sleep. But his parents are holding a funeral because he's been gone for 3 days and 3 nights. All of this is just to kind of package that up and ask, what is the nature of the picaresque time? You know what I mean? Is it the same kind of thing as like a dream, where dreams can expand their boundaries or shrink them? You can live great expanses of time in the space of a dream, but it's like not actually that time, that amount of time. You know what I mean?
What did you mention just a minute ago? The spatial slippage or something like that. When he comes to the river and his uncle's like, "You must have crossed it." It makes me feel like every time I get out of an elevator, it's like, "Oh no, where am I? Which direction did I come from? I have no idea." Still at our school, whenever I come up to the 8th floor, it's like, I don't know which direction I'm facing. I just go the wrong way. Ugh. So I understand. He gets to that river, and I think that when we've read the John Silence stories before, we were wondering, is there a geometry to the weird? There seems to be something about crossing over things or running parallel. And you just mentioned a minute ago being perpendicular. And that's part of the uncle's evidence. Like, I've been trying to follow you this whole time. I've just been following your line. You've been going this way. There is so much about not crossing a boundary, or running parallel together. The skeleton is never actually directly behind him. It's always to the other side, like on another trail, which is extra weird. They're almost always like neck and neck, but the skeleton is just on a different trail parallel. And it's as if they crossed over, it would be kind of a violation of the rules, the dead and the living. Eventually they do cross over, and the main character doesn't even know. Well, he denies that he's dead. Other people are saying that he's dead. But before he even sees his parents, and you mentioned just a minute ago, they're having a full funeral, right? And he goes in and he says, "I'm not dead, everyone. Why are you doing this?" But when he goes into the supernatural cave, where we have this very psychedelic sex scene, kind of. He says, "I'm not dead," but there's an echo in that. There's a voice, but then there's also an echo that is his voice at the same time. So there's a supernatural voice, and then there's his weird echo voice that acts supernaturally. But the supernatural voice says, "You're dead." And he says, "I'm not dead." There's something interesting about life and death as if they're two lines that cannot intersect, but he somehow has conquered it. He has beaten geometry, or he has mastered the perpendicular line.
I love what you're talking about with the line here, because there are truly so many lines in this story. I mean, life and death, he comes back to his own funeral having seemingly cheated death. The river is a major physical, like geological boundary, and yet he crosses it without even having to cross it. And yet the main thing, he's telling the story from the point of view of an adult, or from the period of time in which he is an adult, talking about his childhood. But what he's telling us about is that movement from childhood to adulthood. And the only way I can chalk up what's going on in this Wasai part, this underground thing. Stop. Above ground and underground, there's another boundary. Okay. Anyways, but the only way I can chalk up that is to basically say it's a rite of passage. It's a it's like a crossing into manhood kind of ritual, ceremony, something like that. Just another boundary that he crosses.
There's something that I didn't notice the first time we read this, but now this violation of rules or crossing these boundaries, there's a denial of diviners. So a denial of people who can see the future or who have access to the gods. Because when he comes back, his parents say, obviously, because he's been missing for 3 days. They're like, "Oh my God, we thought you were dead." And he says, "For the past 3 days, we've been sure about it," his father says. And then his mother says, "The diviners have confirmed it." He says, "I was somewhat depressed by these comments and asked if the funeral ceremonies had anything to do with me." They said, "Yes." And they said, and then he says, "The diviners have all been telling you lies. I went for a walk and I've come back with flesh and blood, body and soul, cured from the fear of death. I apologize for having given you so much worry." And so they say, "Well, what have you been eating?" He said, "Well, nothing." "Where did you stay?" "Well, I don't know." "Who did you stay with?" "Nobody." "Don't you have something to explain? Why?" And he just says that he's okay. But I thought it was interesting that even if we are the regular people, the parents and, all of the adults that are waiting for him to come back, we are the regular people. We see this kid arrive. He's been dead. Now he's back. And we thought we had talked to people who can talk to the gods. And now this weird phenomenon comes back and says, "Nope, all of that has been lies. I'm back and I've defeated death." I think that's a very weird thing too. It's a denial of what we were just talking about. That perpendicular line should be priests to the gods. But here he comes out and just takes that whole slash away and says, "Look here, I'm evidence that I'm alive and dead. Dead and alive."
So this is probably one of those things that I would point to, the Western literary tradition. You could think of Odysseus going down into hell. You could think of Aeneas also going down into hell in the Aeneid. Maybe you could even bring in Christ's harrowing of hell, that extra biblical story in which he goes down into hell and brings back up some of the people. Anyways, this idea that he's no longer afraid of death, it's like, I don't know. I don't know what to make of it when a child says, he's basically conquered death. I no longer have any fear of it. But he does seem to come out of it. I don't want to say divine, but I don't know how else to describe it. Certainly somewhat heroic. He no longer seems to be bound to the confines of his family. Before, he was dependent on his uncle for food and for guidance through the woods. And, in difficult situations, he was a scared child. And now he seems to be above and beyond any and all earthly concerns, earthly matters. His family can't contain him because he, they're worried about him, and he's beyond it. He has no emotional bondage to them by the end of this story.
it's weird because, he sees a skeleton, so he is hanging out with death, and then it feels like he's outsmarted death. However, he really hasn't. It's just they've been together. But it reminds me a little bit of King Sisyphus, tricking death and eventually tricking death again, and then eventually finally being caught up with. But tricking death by using his new little invention, what are like handcuffs, and now death is trapped, can't bring King Sisyphus back to the underworld. He tells his parents he has like a theory against death. Not just I'm back, I'm alive. He says, nobody's dead. Death doesn't exist. And if it does, no dead man will ever return. So he says, there's no death. And here I'm proof, even if there were death, death doesn't exist. It's like he has completely trapped death and then also just erased that concept. It's not just death is personified and I've put handcuffs around him and he's going to get me later. It's the concept of death is gone.
Is the concept of death is gone, or is it that having encountered it, he no longer fears it as you would fear an unknown thing? Maybe we're saying the same thing.
No, you got a good point. Yeah, if you can't, what is there to fear but fear itself? If you've seen fear, then you can't really be afraid of fear.
If you've chilled underground with death for 3 days, it's kind of like, you know that whatever happens, it's not that bad.
Exactly. I don't sleep because sleep is the cousin of death. I wanted to look at this grandfather figure, this great-grandfather, because I think it's really interesting that this kid has someone teaching him these really strange pieces of advice. They're really good, interesting pieces of advice, but they don't really make sense in different contexts. So he comes to this point where he sees a chameleon, and then he says, he remembers back to what his great-grandfather has taught him before. So his great-grandfather said, it rarely misses its destination because it knows how to adjust itself to its surroundings and never looks back. You have to think about that. What does that mean? So the chameleon can just go change color, and then that's where I wanted to be. So I think that it's interesting that he has been this kid who doesn't listen. His grandfather has been trying to teach him these lessons, but even the lessons that his grandfather teaches them don't exactly make sense, but they seem to be useful in this weird, picaresque kind of world. When he's watching this chameleon, he's like, okay, I got to be like a chameleon in these woods where anything can trick me.
And because we are recording this from the future, we have the benefit of foresight in this anthology of weird fiction that we're reading. We read Julio Cortázar's Axolotl and Marcel Rodareta's The Salamander. And both of those stories involve, small lizard-like creatures. Yes, it's kind of a shallow comparison, but both of them fundamentally feature the narrator or the protagonist taking on some kind of physical or narratorial or point of view transformation, a metamorphosis into this creature. And while this story doesn't exactly do that on a narrative or like physical sense, I guess you could say he adapts himself into the way of the chameleon. I guess all I'm saying is this is yet another example of our protagonist having an encounter with one of these four-legged crawly creatures and being fundamentally changed by that encounter.
Chameleons, lizards, and also, Zach, the skeleton. We got to get back to the skeleton. I'm really interested because a few times now in the Weird Anthology, we've seen different ghosts, seen, the genius loci, seen things that are lurking in the dark. This feels different because it feels like it's almost helping. The others seem to have all been menaces. This feels like the first time where it's like a Senex or someone who is a guide.
Oh yeah, I mean compare this kid's reaction to seeing these skull and skeleton-like figures to like F. Marion Crawford's The Screaming Skull, where it's just terror, the skull is out to get us. Yeah, I think that maybe one of the most the biggest places in which you can see like a different literary tradition or a different cultural tradition in this is the fact that these encounters with dead bodies, or maybe not dead bodies, maybe I'll just say the post-living, these encounters with the post-living seem to be met with a sense of curiosity and questioning rather than just like an outright blanket fear of, oh my God, they're coming for me. They're going to take me with them back to their hellish beyond.
Well, this one does kind of take the narrator down to a hellish beyond, except it turns out to be not hellish at all. It's a awakening for this person, but it is the tunnel, so you are guided through, almost like Garion down, but you're taken back up and changed, and also given this new skill to, I guess, traverse life and death.
I'd love to read more stories about, people going down into hell, or different cultural stories that involve going down into hell or upward, into maybe a more positive afterlife. I think that that would be a really fun area for us to do a deep exploration in the future. But onward. I'll talk to you later, Bob.
I'll see you in purgatory. That was me on fire. That was a fire sound.